I'm recording this video with permission from Scholastic. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be reading chapter 23 of the Tale of Despereaux. As you can see, I'm outside again. It's such a nice day. I'm filming this on Wednesday, and it's beautiful in Seattle, and so I decided to try to get outside. I know that sometimes you can pick up a little background noise, so that's why I'm wearing these headphones. I really need to get those wireless ones, but this is what we're working with right now. So hopefully you can hear me okay. But today we're going to be reading chapter 23. In chapter 22, which we read yesterday, you'll have to recall that Roscoe, after he landed in the Queen's bowl of soup, everybody was calling out, "Rat, rat!" And he realized it was kind of an ugly word, and nobody really likes rats, at least in this story. Humans don't view them very well. And so he decides to steal this silver spoon that the Queen was using. Remember, we saw a picture. Remember, we saw this picture of him stealing the spoon. Which is kind of silly, but also we heard Roscoe say, "I will have something beautiful and I will have revenge." Both things somehow. And so he's like, at first he was thinking, oh, I want to go into the light. I want to see more of what like rats or what the mice see up there instead of just staying in the dungeon like a rat. But his last sentence leaves us with, "I will be in the dungeon in the darkness." And so we're kind of seeing some character development with Roscoe, but it's kind of going back and forth a little bit. So this is the last chapter in this section. Remember, this novel is grouped up into different books, and so this is the last chapter in this book, and then we'll move on to another one. And my guess is focusing on another character, because that first book was on Despereaux, and this book has been on Roscoe. So this chapter is called Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Roscoe's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscoe gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because the match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed upstairs, seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess P spotted him and called out the word rat, and because of this, Roscoe fell into the Queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the Queen's soup, the Queen died. Remember that? You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else. You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. This is kind of true in real life, too. I think that no matter what we do, it can have good consequences and it can have bad consequences, but usually the things you do impact other things in your life or other people's life one way or another. For instance, if, reader, you will indulge me and allow me to continue this meditation on consequences, because the Queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup, and because soup was outlawed, there were all the instruments involved in making and eating of soup, spoons and bowls and kettles. These things were collected from all the people of the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Roscoe was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the Queen's soup, and the Queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find a rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's tortuous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so, the killing of all the rats was not successful. And in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy. But still, the king officially decreed that the rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are king, you make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being a king is all about. Now, I think the author maybe is saying, like, this is the matter of fact of things. Now, if we think about it, if you were a king, I'd hope, or king or queen, I'd hope that you would maybe take into consideration that making outlandish rules is not what it's completely all about. There are good things about it, too, and you should make reasonable decisions, but it seems like the king is just pretty mad and just wants to get rid of the rats altogether. But, reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the Queen, and that without her, he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothe the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of one outlawed rat in particular? What of chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with a spoon atop of his head. He set to work fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of a scrap of red tablecloth. And as he worked, old one-eared Botticelli Ramerso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You see what comes from rats going upstairs. I hope you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscuro. "Yes, this is exactly what I intended to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." And Roscuro worked and planned. The jailer, Gregory, held tight his rope and made his own way through the darkness. And in the dark cell, the prisoner, who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to the sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of this mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already of some of these consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to a princess. He would fall in love. So the author is kind of going back in time a little bit. She's talking, we already read about Roscuro and about Despereaux and how he fell in love with Princess P. And all of this stuff about Roscuro, the rat, is happening kind of before that. And now it's kind of the storylines don't quite match up, which is interesting. A lot of authors will do that to kind of keep the story going, and not everything is happening at the same time. It makes you as the reader have to think a little bit. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood out inside the castle, hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by King's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier, there sat a young girl with ears that looked nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck to either side of her head. This girl's name, reader, was Miggery-So, and though she did not know it yet, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. And then it says, end of the second book. So that's the end of the second book, which means that we only have, I don't know if there's one or two, there's a couple more books left. But I want to know what you think. Do you think that the next chapter will go into a new character, maybe Miggery-So? Or do you think that it's going to kind of go back and forth? Our pattern so far is the first chapter, or not chapter, the first section was about Despereaux. This section was about Roscuro. And so I'm thinking maybe this next section will be about Miggery-So. But I want you maybe to make a prediction. Why do you think that Miggery-So is important? We don't know much about her. We just know that she's coming in with all those spoons and bowls and plates and forks and all of that. So maybe make a prediction about what you think is going to happen, because this author kind of just throws us for a loop sometimes. Sometimes I think that a certain thing's going to happen and then it completely changes. So yeah, I will see you guys in our next video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye, everyone.